Hello friends, and welcome back to another guide for Marvel Contest of Champions. This is the third and final part of my beginner's guide to the Labyrinth of Legends. In part 2 we went over how to build your team, resource farming and usage, and some important skills that you should have before you head in for the first time. In this final installment of the guide, we're going to take a walk down the easy path, do a champ-by-champ review of everyone you might be facing, and call out some notes about a few specific fights. Most of the champions on this path are pretty vanilla and aren't worth spending an inordinate amount of time on. Finally, I'll cover the corner fights and the Colossus shortcut as well, just in case you were considering either of those options for your first path. Before I start on this section of the guide, I wanted to make a quick note on reworked champions. As of this recording, there are a total of 6 champions on the easy path that have been reworked significantly since 2017. It's important to note that any and all reworks or buffs that occur to champions in the game do not affect the opponents that you'll be facing inside the labyrinth. The only exception to this is when it comes to the animations for both basic and special attacks. I'll call these out individually as I go, but I wanted to make you aware up front that there is no risk that Labyrinth will be made more difficult as Command continues to buff old champs. The last thing I want to mention before we get started is the notation that I'll be using for the rest of the guide. If you see a champion's name in yellow text, that means that they're a normal opponent. If you see a champion's name in red text, that means they're an enigmatic opponent with a doubled health pool and also a special ability. And finally, if you see an asterisk after a champion's name, it means that they are a reworked champion. Your first 4 fights are good warm-ups for the rest of your path. Red Hulk and Old Man Logan are first, and as a general rule, if you can solo both of these fights, you are probably ready to do the rest of your first path. Both of these champions have been reworked and are significantly less powerful inside the labyrinth than they are in other areas of the game these days. Red Hulk will overheat periodically and lose his heat charges. His special 1 is as easy to evade as it gets, and so stick to that, as this special 2 can be trickier to punish. Old Man Logan has a permanent but small regen and also has a very strong resistance to bleed damage. Both of his specials are easy to evade, but watch out for that double hit heavy attack. Next, you'll move on to Elektra and Ms. Marvel, who are both pushovers. Now, if you're running Suicide Masteries, be aware that Elektra reduces defensive ability accuracy by 85% if you have a debuff on you. So this will affect things like your parries, your auto-evades, your auto-blocks, or anything else that might proc when you are being hit. Elektra's specials are both easy to avoid, but I personally prefer pushing her to her special 2 as much as possible. Ms. Marvel has basically nothing going on for her. Her attack increases with her power meter, so it's a bit safer to bait out her special 1 as often as you can. If you've been farming potions in Realm of Legends, this fight will seem like a walk in the park after fighting Captain Marvel there so many times. After Ms. Marvel, you're faced with your first big choice. If you take the first hard left, you'll come to Abomination, who is one of the corner fights. As an enigmatic opponent, Abomination has a doubled health pool, but other than that, his enigmatic ability is one of the easiest to counter. Essentially, bring a champion immune to poison or someone who can reliably shrug off debuffs, and you can take this fight without any problem. Guillotine 2099, Medusa, She-Hulk, and Iceman are all fine options here. If you're running Aegon, he can shrug off the poison quite easily. Blade with Ghost Rider can also take this fight, but it's a bit risky. Danger Sense will reduce the chances that the big poison debuff will occur at the start of the fight, which means if you keep yourself at max power, any other poison debuff will end as quickly as it starts. You might need to spend a few revives getting Danger Sense to work properly. Ghost can immediately shrug off the poison and convert it to Fury, making her a great option to solo this fight. Your next fight is your first real test on the easy path. Without a hard counter to Unstoppable, you'll be unable to punish any special attacks and thus be forced to wait them out and then bait a heavy attack to get your opening. This can sometimes result in you getting backed into a corner, so take care to hit into Unstoppable Colossus's block a bunch when you have the opportunity in order to give yourself more space. And then once you're further to the right, then bait out the heavy attack and continue. If you have space available on your team, there are numerous counters to this fight. The best counter is anyone with a slow mechanic, so champs like Stealth Suit Spider-Man, She-Hulk, Spider-Gwen, Sorcerer Supreme, and Red Guardian can all make this fight a walk in the park. Captain America Infinity War is a hard counter here as well, but his damage will be limited without being able to consistently get heavy attacks off. Another good option here is Human Torch, who can get the solo in this fight even without activating his pre-fight ability. Taking blocked hits will feed him Smolder, and he'll get more powerful as the fight goes on. Ability accuracy reduction is also a good counter. If Blade is your primary champ, bring Sparky and either Dormammu or Ghost Rider, and the chances that Unstoppable triggers will be heavily reduced. Of course, Blade's damage will be limited because of bleed immunity, so that's a bit of a trade-off. If you're really hurting for a counter, champions that prevent buffs or decrease their duration would also work here too. Clairvoyant with the Ghost Rider synergy and Max Mystic Dispersion might work. Mojo might work. I think, though, that if you're at the point where you're considering these kinds of last resort options, you're better off just playing around Unstoppable rather than trying to use a spot on your team to hard counter it. Now, if you've decided on the shortcut option, then Colossus will be your next fight. Colossus is the third reworked champion here, and it's important to note that he has the old abilities, but the new animations. You won't have to worry about the massive amount of armor up buffs during this fight, which is really good. His immunities are also not as expansive as they are now. Colossus will be your first, or maybe second, foray into the wonderful world of enigmatic abilities, but as far as they go, his isn't too difficult. If you hit into his block with a special attack, he reflects the damage back to you, which almost always means you're done. And if he tags you with a heavy, you are KO'd instantly. Now, avoiding being hit by a heavy is easy enough, but the real danger is if Colossus triggers the Labyrinth of Evade on the first hit of your special attack and then immediately blocks the rest. So the safest way to play around this is to stick to only your special 3. Hit into his block with your basic attacks to give him the extra power necessary to cycle his specials, and you'll be good to go. Now, if you've chosen instead to stick to the outside path, your next fight will be Vision instead of Colossus. Vision is another really easy fight. He's got double immunity, so any champ that relies on bleed or poison will be a bit gimped here. His specials are very easy to avoid, and since this is the Age of Ultron flavor, you don't have to worry about power gain unless he gets you with a special. Anyone really works on this fight, and you shouldn't have any trouble with it if you've gotten this far. After Vision on the outer edge, you'll face Spider-Gwen. Spider-Gwen is another reworked champion and can easily catch you off guard if you don't remember her old abilities. Spider-Gwen's Special 1 is the newer animation, so it can actually hit you now, but it does provide her a passive evade charge on top of the Labyrinth evade chance. This means if you're cycling her Special 1, she will have significant uptime of this increased evade chance. If you want to play around it, push her to her Special 2 as much as possible to avoid the evade. Now, there are lots of good evade counters out there, but the best counter to this fight undoubtedly is Venom, who completely negates her evade for the entire fight. Now, he won't counter the Labyrinth evade until he gets the True Strike passive at the end of the fight. Beyond Venom, anyone with True Strike or Slow will work well here. Stealth Suit Spider-Man, She-Hulk, Gwenpool can all eliminate the evade chance. Ghost and Emma Frost can negate this evade as well, but similar to Venom, neither can prevent the Labyrinth evade. Now, if you don't have a solid evade counter ranked up, playing cautiously will be the name of the game. When she's above a bar of power and you want to push her to 2, do 4-hit combos and then immediately hold block instead of finishing your combo with a 5th hit. This will almost always force the opponent to counter with basic attacks, allowing you to bait a heavy and punish. After Spider-Gwen, you'll take Cyclops. Cyclops has a tricky SP1, but by the end of a few paths in Labyrinth, you'll be an expert in avoiding it. Watch for his head coming forward. It's easier to avoid the Special 1 if you don't finish your combos. If you've pushed him over a bar of power, back off after your 4th hit and you'll have more space to work with. If you're running Sparky, you'll have a great time here as he will have class advantage and the auto evade will come in handy. After Cyclops, you can choose to take the second left, which brings you to our second corner fight against Guillotine. Guillotine's enigmatic ability is identical to Abomination's, except that hers applies a permanent bleed rather than a permanent poison. All of the double immune champions that work well against Abomination can take this fight as well. Blade also works here, but you'll need to have brought Dormammu instead of Ghost Rider to have a chance with Danger Sense to stop the initial bleed. Ghost will shrug off the bleed as well. Any other high damage bleed immune will excel here too. Colossus, Thing, Apocalypse, even Emma Frost can do work here since you only need to stop the initial bleed debuff. Other than the health pool, this fight is pretty straightforward. Next up is Falcon. The only thing I want to call out about this fight is that you are going to take a lot of block damage from his Special 1. There's no hard counter necessary here, but it may be helpful to boost. Champions with a consistent regen like Blade or X-23 will probably excel here. Someone with a high block proficiency like Morningstar at 4 or 5 souls will also negate a lot of the chip damage. Push him to his Special 2 as much as you can using the method I described for Spider-Gwen and you'll be fine. After Falcon is Gamora, who has received a minor buff since being added to the game. She can only activate her Godslayer attack once, but if it gets you, it's probably going to kill you. Other than that, she's a pretty easy encounter. After Gamora is Magik, which I've already discussed in an earlier part of the guide. This is probably the most annoying fight on the easy path, but the good news is that these days you have some good options to deal with her. In summary, you have kind of 3 options to deal with Limbo. Use someone who can prevent it from triggering with ability accuracy reduction, use someone who has a very high energy resistance to minimize the damage, or use someone who can regenerate a lot of health on demand and rapidly. The usual ability accuracy reduction suspects are great here: Blade, Archangel, Domino, Gwenpool. Blade has loads of regen and is probably the best overall champion for this fight. You can avoid Limbo completely with Omega Red if you play the fight well. If you're okay using revives, then Human Torch can do a lot of damage in a few attempts. Magik is also a great counter to herself, as usual. If you get her power locked in the corner, some clutch intercepting will allow you to do a lot of damage without activating Limbo at all. Once you get Magik down, take a breath because she is probably the biggest hurdle on your path. After Magik, don't take too much time to rest though before another annoying fight, this time with War Machine. War Machine's Special 1 is nearly impossible to fully evade, and neither of his special attacks can be punished consistently. This means that not only are you taking a lot of block damage from the Special 1, you are also forced to get openings via baiting a heavy or intercepting. Now, similar to Falcon, champs with good regen or high block proficiency are good here. The most important thing for this fight is to retrain yourself not to swipe back when he starts his Special 1. It is not easy to overcome that muscle memory. On the bright side, you only have to fight this guy twice for exploration, so it's not all bad. Blade is another great choice for this fight since he'll be able to keep himself topped up with the regen. Taking the first left after War Machine brings you to another corner fight, and a particularly difficult one. Spider-Man's enigmatic ability lets him start the fight with a 100% chance to evade any attack. A parry removes this ability and it stays off unless you push him to his Special 2. However, he still has his normal evade chance, which is close to 30% at max sig, and the Labyrinth evade chance on top of that. If you want to take this fight without spending a ton of revives, you need an evade counter. The surest counter to this fight, similar to Spider-Gwen, is Venom, who will automatically prevent both the guaranteed evade as well as the one from his signature ability. You can safely push Spider-Man to his Special 2 with Venom rather than taking block damage from the Special 1. Aegon can also do this fight as long as you've ramped him up to the point where he is gaining true accuracy buffs on pretty much every hit. Any other solid evade counter works here as well. Stealth 2 Spider-Man, Spider-Gwen, She-Hulk, Killmonger, Gwenpool, Apocalypse, Professor X, Emma Frost, Nick Fury, all great options. Do not take this fight without a good counter to it. Ant-Man is next, and without a doubt, this is the longest fight on your path. His glancing ability will eliminate almost all of your critical hits, which also eliminates any damage over time effects that proc on critical hits. It's a long fight no matter what, but you can make it marginally faster by using a champion with guaranteed secondary damage or guaranteed damage over time effects. Blade's Special 1 has guaranteed bleeds. Guillotine 2099's energy damage will still be glanced, but it is so powerful that you will eventually whittle him down. Domino can reduce the occurrences of the glancing. With many other champs, you may run out both in rage timers before you get him down. Another thing I want to mention about Ant-Man is that it's easy to think that his Special 1 has more distance on it than it actually does. If you give him too much space when avoiding it, you'll find yourself backed into the corner quite quickly. So he'll do the 3 hits, shrink, and then run toward you. But while he's running, there are no hit events, and you can just stand still, let him run right into you, and then wait for the uppercut before your final dex. Deadpool is next. He's very straightforward, but just watch out for that big power gain that triggers when he hits 30% health. If he has much more than a bar of power when this power gain triggers, he will get his Special 3, and you will die. Daredevil is also easy, just remember not to use any basic attacks or special attacks with projectiles. Taking the very next turn after Daredevil will bring you to the 4th and final possible corner fight, and that is against X-23. You can consider X-23 to be a much more stacked version of her counterpart in Realm of Legends. She will heal 5% of her health every 15 seconds on top of her natural regeneration abilities. You kind of have 4 basic options here. The first option is to reverse the healing with a champion who has access to Petrify. I think without a doubt the best counter for this fight is my favorite champ in the game, Void. Even a 4-star Void can take this fight as long as he has the dupe and a reasonably high signature level. Wasp, She-Hulk, Mr. Fantastic, and Captain America Infinity War also have access to Petrify, but Void's is by far the easiest to use and has excellent uptime. In any case, maxing out the Despair Mastery will speed up the heal reversal. Speaking of Despair, your second option is to reverse the healing with a champion that reliably places lots of debuffs. You can get this type of heal reversal with champions like Human Torch, Apocalypse, Sorcerer Supreme, or even Man-Thing. Torch's Incinerates reverse healing on their own, so Despair makes him much more effective. Man-Thing places Poison, which reduces healing by nearly a third. If you want to see someone take X-23 down with Sorcerer Supreme, I think KT1 did a video of this on his channel, so I would encourage you to check that out. Your third option is someone who has access to a lengthy and reliable heal block. Warlock and Mysterio are probably your best options in this category. Archangel is also great as long as you can get the spacing right with his heavies once you're out of parries. As far as other champs go, Darkhawk has a 30-second heal block on his special 3, Yondu has a 10 or 20-second heal block on his special 1, and Proxima Midnight has a 14-second heal block on her special 1, as long as you keep her above 50 hits. Your final option to deal with X-23 is to just outdamage the regeneration, and to be honest, pretty much only your usual suspects fit the bill here. A ramped up Aegon will reduce the accuracy of her regen buffs and will eventually outdamage the rest. Guillotine 2099 can easily outdamage the regen in this fight, and also has access to the Spectre debuff on her special 2, which will reverse some of the healing. Star-Lord, Ghost, and Colossus can all do enough damage in the right situation as well. So you're in the home stretch now. Venom is next, and he is another reworked champ. He's far less powerful here, but his AI is typically very aggressive, and it's easy to get backed into a corner baiting out a special attack. This is because he will frequently attempt 4 and 5 hit combos before backing off. Give yourself space as often as you can by hitting into his block. Your last 2 fights before the boss are easy. Iron Fist has basically nothing going for him at all except for armor breaks. With Civil Warrior, the only thing to be aware of here is that every passive stack of armor he has reduces your offensive ability accuracy. This acts in a similar but not as potent version of Ant-Man's glancing. These 2 fights should be no problem for you. Well, you've made it. You've finally reached the final boss. 1 fight stands between you and glory. Maestro can be a tricky opponent depending on who you fight him with. This is because his enigmatic ability grants him different mechanics based on the class of the attacker. So against Cosmic Champions, Maestro will nullify your buffs when he uses a special attack. This ability really doesn't do much, and as a result makes Cosmic Champions probably the easiest class to beat Maestro with. Against Skill Champions, Maestro automatically reduces your offensive ability accuracy. This means that you'll see your bleeds occur less frequently when using someone like Blade or Gwenpool. If you bring a mutant, you'll be power drained whenever taking a blocked hit in order to prevent the big special attacks that mutants typically use. In addition, Maestro will gain a lengthy armor up whenever he uses a special attack, which will further mitigate your burst damage. The Tech class might be the most dangerous class to take against Maestro. So against Tech champs, Maestro will receive random and permanent buffs at different points throughout the fight. The real problem is that these buffs can include Power Flood and Regeneration. If you take a Tech champ against Maestro without a way to counter these types of buffs, you're probably in for a bad time. In my only solo against Maestro with Guillotine 2099, I got lucky with manageable buffs and then they stopped generating completely. As with many other mechanics in the Labyrinth, it's unclear exactly why the buffs stop in some fights and keep generating in others. Nevertheless, you should know that bringing a Tech champ against Maestro is risky and your success is heavily dependent on RNG. If you need to bring a Tech champ, you need to quit out of the fight whenever you see the regen proc. Science is another class you probably want to avoid bringing against Maestro, as he shrugs off all debuffs from Science champs. Now, there is an exception to this ability, and it may work in your favor. When this ability was coded, it targeted all specific debuffs that existed at the time the Labyrinth was created. This means that any types of debuffs that were introduced to the game since then will still work and can still be applied to Maestro. So this includes newer debuffs like Petrify, Slow, Vulnerability, Rupture. All of these debuffs will function just fine. In addition, this ability only applies to active debuffs, so passive effects like Human Torch's Nova Flames will still work. Finally, remember that shrugging off debuffs also includes your parry stun, so do not get caught off guard by that. Finally, we come to the Mystic class. Maestro applies different types of negative effects on you depending on certain actions that occur during the fight. This starts with a permanent passive heal block effect that counters the lifesteal that many Mystic champions possess. Other effects include a passive power lock when you land a critical hit, a passive weakness when you're taking a blocked hit, a poison when you hit into Maestro's block, and a passive armor break when you are hit. Given that he is not a common opponent, you might not be used to Maestro's special attacks. His special one has a hit and then 3 beam attacks. You can safely block the first 2 beams, but you absolutely have to dodge the 3rd beam. If you don't, you'll get degen through your block, and you'll probably die. His special 2 is really easy to outdistance, and you should push him to it as often as possible. His heavy attack is the same as old Man Logan's, so don't forget it has 2 hits to it. Below 75% health, Maestro will gain a permanent passive combo shield. This is notable because his critical rate increases for every 5 hits on his combo meter. Now that said, you probably won't be taking that many hits without dying, so you can probably just ignore this mechanic. The last thing to be aware of when fighting Maestro is that when he reaches certain other thresholds of health, he gains permanent stacks of fury that make him hit even harder than he normally does. So at 60% health, he'll gain 2 stacks. At 35% health, he'll have 6 stacks. At 20% health, he'll move up to 16 stacks. And at 10% health, he'll have a whopping 36 stacks of fury. So that's about it for Maestro. Stick with it and expect that it will take some revives. A solo is possible, but is very difficult, and only a few champs have the damage to do it. So that's it for part 3. In the future, I may do some advanced guides for other paths, or for how to plan paths around a specific attacker. If you enjoyed this guide, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content. And as usual, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you again next time.